So this is Mrs. Black's last year, and we'll make sure the whole series is online. And today's shir is sponsored by Barry and Joyce Clark in commemoration of the Yahrzeit of Gittel Bas Devel Dov. And that is, so thank you. And anyone who ever wants to sponsor a shir in honor of something can contact me. And our next series starting next week, as you know, is Leah Herzog, and it's Jacob and Sons as viewed through the lens of Parshanut and psychology.
Okay, hi everybody. Good to see everyone again. I've really enjoyed this opportunity to learn with all of you, so thank you all for that. So today I wanted to learn, we'll call it a tshuva, but it's actually not really a tshuva for Moshe Feinstein. He never published this tshuva, we'll put it that way. Rav Moshe's tshuvas have, I can't believe I never said this, but Rav Moshe's tshuvas are published in a series called the Igrot Moshe. I think 8 volumes were published in his lifetime, and the 9th volume was published posthumously, and there was some controvery in the Feinstein family over whether Rav Moshe really wrote those tshuvos or whether he reneged on them, type of thing. But this tshuva that we're going to look at today was never actually published. But it was a question that he was asked and a response that he gave that his son-in-law, Rabbi Moshe David Tendler, published in a book called Caring for the Critically Ill. So he published the whole thing in English. And it's basically like his report of what the question was and what Rav Moshe kind of reasoned and then responded. And it's a fascinating question. And it's really like an amazing example of just his greatness of taking on the responsibility of this very weighty question. And I thought that was something appropriate to wrap up with. So as I was thinking about it in the car on the way to school today, I also was just thinking to myself how, when I was preparing this and going over the notes and kind of like thinking about it very academically, very halachically, it also kind of occurred to me, like, it's important to also think about this, like, these were real people. This is a real family, real babies, like, we're talking about real human lives here, so I definitely want to sort of, like, introduce it with that sensitivity that even though we're going to be kind of talking about very, like, technical issues, we should have that sensitivity that these are real people and real human lives, and whatever is decided is, in some ways like tragic either way in this question. So kind of just with that background in mind, we'll get into the details. So the question is about separating conjoined twins. I think that's the scientific term, Siamese twins, also known as. So we'll start with the facts of the case that were brought to Moshe Feinstein, and then we'll go over some of the halachic sources that came up in the discussion about how to respond to the question, and we'll see the final conclusion. So again, Rav Moshe David Tendler published this discussion in Care of the Critically Ill, and I took it from a website that excerpted it from that book that Rav Moshe David Tendler published. So source number 1 tells us the facts of the case. So the story happened. I don't know if anybody remembers the story, but the story happened early in September 1977. A drama began that added much kavod, much dignity to the wisdom of Torah and to those who spend their lives applying Torah knowledge to the complex problems encountered daily in the modern world. I wouldn't say that this encounter is daily, but an example. In Lakewood, New Jersey, Siamese twins were born to a prestigious family of Torah educators. The twins were taken by helicopter on September 15th to the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, CHOP, it's like the famous Children's Hospital at Penn, where Dr. C. Everett Koop, who subsequently became the Surgeon General of the United States, was then the hospital's chief of surgery. Immediately after the initial evaluation, it was obvious to all the physicians called in to evaluate the twins that both would die unless they were separated. However, the only way one child would be viable was if the other child was killed during the surgery. The question was referred to Moshe Feinstein for his evaluation and decision. So just a couple more details about the case. The children designated baby A and baby B were fused in the ventral area, all the way from the shoulder down to the pelvic region. The twins shared one 6-chambered heart. So the heart's supposed to have 4 chambers. They had 6 chambers for the 2 of them. The wall separating the essentially normal 4 chambers from the other 2 were most likely the stunted heart of baby A was too thin to be divided. It was not possible to give the 2-chambered heart to baby A so that she would survive for as long as the 2-chambered heart could carry her physiological needs. There was only one solution. The entire 6-chambered heart had to be given to baby B, and the life of baby A would have to be sacrificed. It was clear to all concerned that this was a major ethical issue that had ramifications for the abortion debate and for the ethics of neonate salvage. Actually, do you have that in part of your? Yeah. Okay. Can I have a copy of the packet that you have also? Thank you so much. Okay, so the chief surgeon, a deeply religious man, was fully aware of the ethical import of any decision in this case. Dr. Koop referred the case to the court so as not to have any accusation of premeditated murder leveled against him, In addition, nurses and doctors at CHOP consulted with their religious guides, and many reported back that they would not be able to participate in the surgery. So this is obviously a huge question, a really weighty, halachic, ethical, moral, medical ethics question, which was not simple to answer, but time actually did start to become of the essence as the weeks went on. They realized that they really needed to make a decision quickly, because otherwise, both babies would probably just die and they would lose the chance. So source number 2, Rabbi Tendler reports that the doctor is quoted as having said that the ethics and morals involved in this decision are too complex for me. This is what Dr. Koop said. I believe they are too complex for you as well, meaning for anyone else. Therefore, I referred it to an old rabbi on the Lower East Side of New York. He is a great scholar, a saintly individual. He knows how to answer such questions. When he tells me, I too will know. So they referred the case to Rav Moshe Feinstein, and this doctor, who later became the Surgeon General of the United States, really appreciated Rav Moshe's greatness, that he was the right person to answer this question. So Rav Moshe didn't kind of just answer this question on his own. What's reported is that he, a team of scholars kind of were together, discussing and analyzing the issues and analyzing the case. And Rabbi Tendler had met with the doctors also to find out the medical facts of the case. And basically, there's analysis of 3 different sugyas in the Gemara that possibly could lead to a conclusion that possibly should be relevant to this issue. In the end, Rav Moshe bases the decision off of only one of them, but we'll go through the 3 and we'll see why some of them are, why the other 2 seem to not be relevant in the end. So the key questions to analyze here are, first of all, is it permitted to kill one person to save another, right? Because can you kill baby A in order to save baby B? Is there a difference between actively causing the death of the first person versus just letting it happen, right? What should be done if one person's death can save other lives, can save multiple other lives, which isn't necessarily the case here. And does that change if one person's kind of pursuing another, if one's a pursuer, one's a victim? And also, how do we apply all these legal principles in a real life situation? So the first issue that had to be addressed really was, are the babies one person or 2 people? Halachically speaking, are they considered one person or 2 people? Because if they're one person, then as tragic as it would be,
Julia Rose in the Iracone. Julia Rose in the Iracone. Please come up to Mrs. Detail.
So that seems like it would be permissible, but if you look at source number 3. There's a precedent in the Gemara for this. The Gemara Menachos, source number 3. So the Gemara says, Ba'amine Plemo me Rebbe. So Plemo asked Rebbe Yehuda Hanassi, who is the compiler of the Mishnah, Mishi yesh lo shnei roshim, be'iza mehen miniach tefillin. So if someone has 2 heads, which one should he put tefillin on? And Rebbe said, Amar lei, o kum galei, o kibel alacha samta. So either go into exile or you will be excommunicated, which seems to have nothing to do with this question. But then someone walked into Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi and said, Amarle, it's yale li yunuka de ile trei rishay. No, this really happened, that a baby was just born that has 2 heads. So if the baby was a firstborn baby, there's a requirement to do pidyon haben, to redeem the firstborn son. And the question is, if this baby is 2 babies, then maybe you only need to redeem the first, one that's older. If it's 1 baby, how much? But you don't know which one's older because they're attached at the same time. So maybe you need to pay double to account for the possibility of either one being the oldest. If it's 1, then you would only need to pay the amount of 1 baby being redeemed, right? So the Gemara concludes, Atahu sabatanale, chayav litain lo yud slaim. You have to give 10 silver pieces, which is double the amount that's really required. Really, the requirement is 5. Anyone been to a pidyon even or made a pidyon even? They're so rare because there's so many exceptions, but 5 coins is the amount that's really used. So the fact that Gemara says you have to give 10 shows that we're treating them as 2 separate people, and we have to account for the possibility that either one is the firstborn and needs to be redeemed. So the Gemara seems to, right, if it seems to be 1 person, fused body, but 2 heads, it's 1 person, it's 2 people. And that's, in fact, what source number 4, what Dr. Koop said also about these 2 babies, right? On September 20th, I met with Dr. Koop and his staff to determine the medical facts. That's Rabbi Tendler speaking, Rav Moshe Feinstein's son-in-law. So he met with Dr. Koop to determine the facts. And the first halacha concern was to establish that we were, in fact, dealing with 2 separate human beings. Although they were joined at the chest and their livers were co-joined, as were the hearts, the girls were separate human beings with their own brains and nervous systems. And that's what Dr. Koop insisted. He kept on insisting on that every single time that the rabbis asked him, that they're 2 separate human beings. So that possibility of separating them based on that wasn't going to work. So then the other issues needed to be addressed. right? So there are two lives, and we do know that in general in halacha, from source 5, which we'll look at in a second, that you can't sacrifice one life for another. And the value of human life is a supreme value in halacha. We say that you should die, that you should violate sins rather than be killed, right? If someone's threatening your life, or if you're in a life-threatening situation, unless you violate a sin, you're supposed to violate it, except for the big three, right? We'll come back to that source later. But we know that halacha really values human life, and that we can't choose one life over another. And that's explicit in source number 5, a Mishnah in Masachet Ohalo, which is a Masachet all about Tumah and how, right, is Tumah, like, you can become Tamei by being the same under the same roof as something else that's Tamei. That's what the whole Masachet is about. So here the Mishnah says, Hayishashi mikasha leilid, a woman who's in danger during childbirth, you can basically abort the fetus inside of her, if that's going to save her life, is implied. And then you would remove the pieces. Because her life is more important than his life, the fetus. But yet, once the baby's head has emerged, we don't touch the baby, because we don't push aside one life for another. So this Mishnah obviously has implications for abortion in halacha, which is not exactly our topic for today. But the point of me bringing it at this point in this year is to show when we have two lives, we don't choose one over another. You can't kill one person to save another. So are there any exceptions to that? How does that play out here? Is there any way here to allow the doctors to do the surgery that would in essence kill baby A to save baby B? So the first kind of approach to take is based on the classic Gemara about lifeboat ethics, which is source number 6. So source number 6 tells us, Shnayim shehu mahalchin baderech. So this is like a classic example. You have two people who are, on a trip. They're traveling. Ubiyada echad mehen kiton shamayim. Only one of them has a jug of water. They're in the desert. They're stranded. They have nothing left, and they're both going to die because they're going to have dehydration. And only one of them has a jug of water. Im shotin shnehem meitim. If they split it in half and they each drink half of the jug, that's not going to be enough to hydrate either of them, and they're both going to die. But if one of them drinks the whole thing, that will be enough to get him through the rest of the journey, and he'll make it to the destination, but the other person won't. So the question is, what do? Right? Should they split it and they'll both die, or should you save one, or should one of them be saved? So Darash ben Petura says, Mutav sheishtu shnehem ve'yamutu, that they should both die. And one of them shouldn't, cause the other one to die. Or see the other one die. Ad sheba Rabbi Akiva really made, but then Rabbi Akiva says, "V'chai achicha imcha," your brother's supposed to live with you. Chayecha kod min l'chayei chavercha. Since it says v'chai achicha imcha, with you, your life comes before your friend's life. Your life takes precedence over your friend's life. So,
who's you?
The person with the jug of water, right? So in this case, in this Gemara, you have two. You don't have a third party. You have two people. One of them has a jug of water. One of them doesn't. So Rabbi Akiva says, you already have it, so you should drink it, because you have to take care of yourself first before anyone else, right? It's like on the airplane they always say you have to put the oxygen mask on you before you put on your baby. I always wonder if, God forbid, anyone's ever in that situation, like, would anyone really be able to actually do that? Like, really put it on yourself before you, like, save your child? Like, is that really what happens when people are faced with that situation? Like, I can't imagine that. But really, like, that's what they always say you're supposed to do, and that's what this Gemara is saying you're supposed to do also, that your life takes precedence over your friend's life. And that's because in this situation it's two people, and one of them already has the opportunity to save himself, whereas the other one doesn't. There's no third party intervening to change those facts. So
right, and also if we say both babies are equally at a disadvantage, like if one had a better chance than the other, so then I think that would be, this would fit in nicely, but I'm not sure that can apply to what we have.
You think it would fit in nicely if they were equally?
No, if they weren't. If one had a much better chance than the other.
Because that would be like one of them already has the jug of water, so to speak. Right, I hear that. Well, but they do here, because one of them has the 4-chambered heart, and one, like, baby, and we're going to get back to this later, but the facts of the case were that no matter what they did, baby A couldn't survive. Like, if they left them together, they would both die. If they separated them, then they could only separate them and give baby B a chance of surviving. They couldn't, like, separate them and have baby B die and baby A survive. That wasn't an option. It was only because baby A also had a circulatory disorder, that even if they gave baby A the whole heart, like it wouldn't work. So I think maybe what you're saying is
that's-
true, but
that's
the
nicely,
facts of the
yeah.
case actually do play out
Fit
that baby
nicely,
B
yeah.
had a better chance of surviving. Okay, so it's the question of sort of like sharing the heart seems to be similar to the case of sharing the water. Like there's one heart. If they share it, so to speak, they're both going to die. But if they give it to one of them maybe could live. The chances also at this point, like they say at some point in the Rabbi Tendler reports at some point in the article, that the chances of baby B surviving even after the surgery were still pretty slim and very unknown. But there was at least a possibility, whereas if they left them, they knew they were going to both die, and if baby A also wouldn't have any chance of surviving, even if they gave him the whole heart. But the question is, like, does the single heart really belong to one of the twins, and can one of the twins, like, claim it for herself? Right now, they're attached, they're sharing. Like, in the case of the Gemara, one person has the water, the other person doesn't, but here, like, they're sharing it right now, so who does it really belong to? How do you decide? Maybe based on who has the better chance of surviving, but it doesn't necessarily come from the Gemara. But like I just said, the surgeon, right, Dr. Koop, he did report that only one of the babies could plausibly keep the heart and survive. So maybe that should make a difference. And you see that in source number 7. That's exactly what we were just talking about, right? Was Dr. Koop sure? We're on page 3 now. Was Dr. Koop sure that the 6-chambered heart could only be given to baby B? Could it not also be given to baby A and have baby B die? And Dr. Koop responded that there was no doubt that the only infant who could be helped by surgery was baby B, because in addition to the shared liver and heart, baby A also had a circulatory defect that would not permit her to survive any length of time, even if she were given the 6-chambered heart. So it seems like maybe we could compare the cases, and maybe we could say the heart should be claimed by baby B, but there still seems to be a way to, it still seems like you could really distinguish between the case in the Gemara and our case, and that in the sense of what I said before, in the case in the Gemara, the person with the water is the one making the decision. Here, the surgeon is the one who's going to have to do it. It's a third party who's going to have to intervene, who's going to have to actively do the surgery and give the heart to baby B and take it away from baby A. So it's not like the person who has it is the one who's decided to keep it in the case of the surgery, which might make it different. Right? The Chazon Ish says that the Gemara in the Gemara that we just saw about the water in the desert, it would be this. He interprets it that it would be the same if it was a third party, and the third party could decide to just give the water to whomever he wants, and then that person has it, and he could decide to drink it and not give it to the other person. But other cases, other poskim don't agree with that interpretation. Plus the case here is also different because it's also passive versus active, right? In the case in the Gemara, the person is going to drink the water, and therefore the other person is not going to have any water, and he's going to not survive. He's not going to survive. But the person who's drinking the water isn't doing anything to the other person, to his friend. He's just drinking the water himself, which is going to result ultimately in the other person not surviving. But he's not actively doing anything to him. Whereas here, in the case of the surgery, the surgeon is going to have to actively take the heart away from baby A. Likely in the course of the surgery, baby A was going to actually die first before they finished the surgery and gave it to baby B. So he's going to actively have to end the life of baby A in order to save baby B. So that also makes the cases different. So there's two differences between the case of the babies and the case of in the Gemara. Number one is that there's a third party involved. And number two is the active versus passive. That there's a third party involved who's going to have to make the decision, and they're going to have to actively kill one of the people to save the other. So that basically rendered that whole line of thinking in that Gemara not relevant to the case in question, and Rav Moshe didn't really pursue that avenue as a way to permit the surgery, right? He didn't go with Rabbi Akiva's line in the Gemara that chayecha kodnu l'chayei chavercha as a way to permit the surgery, because he didn't feel that it applied to the case in question. And it doesn't end up playing a major role in his decision. So then the question becomes, though, like we just said, here the case of the babies is a case of a third party intervening and a case of actively taking a life. And the question is, are you ever allowed to, right, we saw in the Mishnah in Ohalot in source number 5 that ein docha nefesh mipnei nefesh, but is that always the case? Is there ever a situation where you're allowed to give up one person's life to save others? So usually not, right? And that's what I referenced before in source number 8. Is the Gemara in Sanhedrin that famously talks about the concept of Yeharig V'al Ya'avor. And Rabbi Yochanan says, right, so on page 3, source number 8, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yehud Tzadak, Nimnu v'Gamar ba'aliyat beit Nitza belod. So they counted all the rabbis who were there in that second floor, in that attic in the house in Lod, and this is what they concluded: Kol averot shebetorah im omrim la'adam avor v'al teharig ya'avor v'al yaharig. Every sin in the Torah, if you're told either violate this or I'm going to kill you, you should violate it, right? If you're told eat that pork sandwich or I'm going to kill you, you should eat the pork sandwich. If you're told, if you eat this, Oreo on Yom Kippur, eat it, or I'm going to kill you, eat it. And not only a situation of...
Right, because as long as it's private, not if it's public, it's different.
Right, okay, so the Gemara there, in the Gemara in Sanhedrin does go into, right, a longer discussion of that changes whether it's private or public changes, whether it's a time of persecution or just like a random incident that changes. So definitely it's not as simple as this first initial presentation the Gemara seems to present it, but for the purposes of our situation, like, we do know that it doesn't really matter, because murder is actually one of the ones that is always Yeharig V'al Ya'avor, even in private situations, right? So, right, so the Gemara says, Chutz me'avodah zarah v'gilui arut v'shlichut damim, except for idol worship, adultery, and murder. So the Gemara then goes on to explain Rotzeach Gufei Minala, and the case of a murderer itself. From where do we know it? What's the source that you can't give up one person's life to save another? Svarahu, the Gemara says it's based on logic. Zahahu Atalikamei Rabba, because a case like this came before Rabba, one of the rabbis in the Gemara, of Amarle, and he said to the questioner, Amarli Mare Durai Zil Katle Laplana, if someone comes to me and says, kill such a person or else I'll kill you, right, if you don't, or I'll kill you, Amarle, he said to him, you should let yourself be killed and don't kill the other person. Because who says whose blood is redder? How are you to decide whose blood is redder? How are you to decide that your life is more important than the other person's life? So if it's the question of you being killed or you killing someone else, you have to let yourself be killed. So we see that in general, we don't take one life for another, and we're not allowed to do that. But are there any exceptions to that? So in source number 9, we see a possible exception if both people will die, right? In the case in the Gemara in source number 8, it's like either you kill him or I'll kill you. But if you don't kill him, he's going to survive, right? You'll die, but he'll survive. What about if they're both going to die, right? What if it's either give us that one guy, or either you kill that one guy, or I'm going to kill all of you, right? What about in that case? Are you allowed to take one life to save multiple lives, right? So the Gemara in source number, the Yerushalmi in source number 9 brings up this case, and I'll read it in English. The Gemara says, we learn this is the ruling for groups of people who were traveling and were accosted by non-Jews who said, give us one of you and we will kill him, and if not, we'll kill all of you. So you either had to give up one sacrificial lamb, or you were going to all get killed. And the Gemara says, even if all of them will be put to death, they should not hand over even one person of Israel. You can't choose, right? It's the same logic. Who's to say that his blood is redder? Just because, even though it's going to cause more lives to be given, you're not allowed to give that person over to be killed. But if they singled out you're not allowed to choose who you're going to give over. But if they singled out someone, as in the Sheva ben Bichri episode, then they should hand him over and not get killed. But if the non-Jews come and say, give us Joe, right, they ask for a specific person, then the Gemara seems to be implying you're not really deciding whose blood is redder. They already decided, and you're allowed to give up that person to save the rest of the group. But then the question is when that applies. Rabbi Shimon Reish Lakish says, this is providing he is subject to the death penalty like Sheva ben Bichri was. Reish Lakish says, even then, you're only allowed to give up Joe if Joe was really about to be executed anyway. But so now, instead of him being executed by the court, he'll be executed by this mob. But if there was no reason that Joe was going to die soon anyway, then you're not allowed to give him up, even if they specify, give us Joe. Rabbi Yochanan says this applies even if he was not deserving of the death penalty like Sheva ben Bichri was. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, if they single someone out, then they're basically deciding whose blood is redder. You're not deciding, so you can give up the person, even if he wasn't going to die soon anyway.
Are these Holocaust responses too? of these because there was many instances. in
Yeah,
the
so
Holocaust.
definitely in like the Mimamakim Chuvos and some of the Chuvos that are published about the Holocaust, you for sure will see these discussions come up. And they were like awful situations of people having to make decisions like this. And the Crusades also, the same idea. And for those of you who walked in late, I started off by saying that I think it's important for us to kind of keep the background in mind and the sensitivity in mind that even though we're kind of talking about these sources like with a very technical halachic lens, like these are like sometimes real stories of real people.
They don't
who
call
have that
them Siamese
sensitivity,
anymore.
and it's not, it's not just like, oh, you'll die or you'll die, and
Conjoined, yeah, it's not, Siamese is not even politically correct.
right.
anymore.
That's why I titled the
Yeah.
sheer conjoined
Yeah.
twins. Colloquially speaking, they talk about Siamese twins, but
I think
the
Holocaust
proper
was-
scientific medical term is conjoined. Yeah. No, that's
I
okay.
think that Holocaust was separate, for example, if they were in a bunker and a baby was crying and would alert the
Right.
enemies that they're there. I think that's a whole different, I think the Chuvos from the Holocaust maybe took a different turn.
No,
And if
it's
this baby was going to alert people that there was a group of people alive,
mhm.
I think that many cases where the baby was eliminated.
It's definitely possible. I'm not familiar like off the top of my head with like specific examples of chuvos, but I'm sure that different situations like led to different conclusions, and no matter what, like they're awful situations. I know Ms. Wolf, who used to teach in my note last year, she wrote an article that was published online. I don't know if any of you saw it on Times of Israel about how she always like taught makos to the students, masachet makot, all about like beaten and murder and witnesses, and and she now living in Israel, like, unfortunately during this time in Israel where like things are difficult and people are dying in the streets every day, she kind of like took a step back and realized like she, like regrets having sometimes spoken about these topics like, more callously. So I think it is important to like keep that sensitivity in the back of our heads even as we learn through these sources in a more academic way. So I'll just reiterate that introduction for those of you who came in after I started. Okay, so so we have the Gemara about if they ask are you allowed to give up one person's life to save a group, and the Rambam here in source number 10 paskins like Reish Lakish. Usually we paskin like Rabbi Yochanan in a machlukas between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, and here we paskin like Reish Lakish. That you're only allowed to give up the person's life if it's someone who was chayav mita, who was subject to the death penalty anyway. Right? The Rambam says, if non-Jews say, because normally in the situation in these times it was going to be non-Jews persecuting and asking this type of thing, give us one person from you and we'll kill him, or vim lav naharog kulchem, we're going to kill all of you. Yahargu kulam v'al yimtzaru lahem nefesh echad miYisrael. Everyone should be killed, and you shouldn't give one person. Vim yachduhu lahem v'amru tenu lanu ploni unaharog et kulchem. If they specify who they want and they say, give us Joe or kill all of you, if he was chayav mita, if he was subject to the death penalty anyway, like Sheva ben Bichri, is a story from Sefer Shmuel, then you could give him, then you could give over that person. But you shouldn't say like, oh, you should ask for this guy because him will give you. But if the person is not, that they ask for is not subject to the death penalty anyway, then you can't give anybody. So he's passing like Reish Lakish, that even if they specify someone, if it's not someone who was going to die anyway, then you can't give the person over. So, yeah.
So why in none of these discussions do they talk about that person who is identified, I guess on the side of, the other side, that he's a robot? That the person who's been asked for actually
Okay,
is the category.
good question. So we're going to get to Rosé in like 2 minutes.
I didn't hear.
The question asked was why in these discussions of whoever's been giving over whoever's been asked for, why do they not talk about him as a rodef? So we're going to get to the topic of rodef in a minute. In those cases, it's possible that some of the Rishonim there do address that issue, meaning once that person's been asked for, then that person becomes a rodef. Meaning if he doesn't get killed, then everybody else is going to get killed. But he's not a rodef because he's not trying. It's possible some of the Rishonim there address this question, but I would say maybe you could answer that he's not actively trying to kill them himself. Like his existence, he's not like the one chasing them with a gun. Like somebody else is the rodef. He's kind of just like the middleman. Does that make sense? Although I could imagine someone arguing like the fact now that he's going to survive is going to kill everybody else. But I don't know if it's the exact parallel. But we'll get there in a second. Okay, so how could this possibly apply to our case of the babies? Maybe baby A could possibly be sort of like given up, right, to save baby B. But is baby A considered like chayav mita? Obviously, he didn't like sin or do any like commit any crime that would make him have the death penalty. But maybe like the fact that he's going to die anyway is parallel enough that would allow us to give him over in order to save baby B. So this was suggested as an approach in the discussions with Rav Moshe Feinstein, but it didn't end up being the basis for his ruling. And we'll see in source number 11 that Rabbi Tendler writes about that. So during the almost 2 weeks of intensive discussions held under the guidance of Rav Moshe, a second approach was suggested, which received the careful attention of Rav Moshe. It did not receive his concurrence, only his appreciation for the analysis suggested. So this, in the end, wasn't what Rav Moshe based his psak on. And then he goes on, Rabbi Tendler goes on to summarize all the sources that we just looked at. And he says the Rama, Rav Moshe Isserlis, the Ashkenazic gloss of the Shulchan Aruch in Yoreh 157, records the Rambam's ruling as the correct halacha, that we pass like Reish Lakish, that it is forbidden to save one life at the cost of another unless that individual was guilty of a death penalty, as was the case of Sheva ben Bichri. So now he relates it to the analysis of our case. The analysis of the case of the Siamese twins, however, seems to satisfy even the requirements of Maimonides, so that in this case, all would have concurred with the opinion of Rav Moshe. BBA could not live, no matter what surgical plan was followed. Although there was no ruling of a Beit Din that she was guilty of any sin and therefore would be subjected to capital punishment, Hashem himself issued such a ruling. There was an edict from heaven that the child could not live. Nobody could help this child. Even if all the organs were placed in her body, she could not survive. Therefore, BBA should be classified as if she were Sheva ben Bichri, for whom there was no hope, and the destiny was already inscribed by Hashem himself. So that's an interesting analysis, right? I wouldn't necessarily have thought that myself, that someone who is destined to die, even if it's not because of a crime, would be equivalent to the case in the Gemara of someone who's chayav mita because of a sin they committed. But nonetheless, that was the analysis suggested. But that wasn't the final basis for the ruling here. The final basis for the ruling here was based on the concept of rodef. So let's talk about that. So the last possible way to allow for the surgery is maybe using the concept of rodef, of a pursuer. So that concept has its basis in the Mishnah in Sanhedrin on Daf Ayin Gimel. So the Mishnah says, "Ve'elu hein shematzilin otan benafshan." The Mishnah says that you could save someone's life with a life. The Mishnah is going to give examples of saving someone's life by taking another life. And one of the examples is harodef achar chaveru lahargo. If one person is chasing somebody else to kill the second person, if A is chasing B, you're allowed to save B by killing A. Okay? So that's what the Mishnah says.
Clarification,
Yeah.
when it says you are allowed, you if you are the one being pursued, or you if you are observing?
Either. If the victim could potentially save himself, then for sure he would be allowed to in self-defense, or a third party, onlooker could also. The Gemara later talks about how you're supposed to try to stop the person, lahatzil b'echad me'ivarav, with, by wounding him and not killing him, but if the only way to stop him is to kill the person, then you're allowed to. Okay, so maybe that could be applied here, but is the baby A pursuing baby B? Right now, they're conjoined, and they seem to be, who says, who's pursuing who, right? Who says who's causing who to die? So we have to try to figure that out. So again, source 13 is the same Mishnah in Olo that we saw before. We'll just review it again, that in the case of a fetus inside the mother, the fetus is allowed, you can abort the fetus if it's endangering the mother's life, but once the baby has come out, then you can't do anything to save the mother's life, because we can't save one life for another. Now, the Gemara, commenting on the Mishnah of Rodef, brings up this Mishnah from Olo, so that's why I brought it back in here. So if you look at source 14, Rav Huna says, Katan harodef nitan lahatzilo b'nafsho. So even if a child is the one who's pursuing the victim, you can still kill the child to save the victim. Kasava rodef ino tzarich hatra, because it's implying that a rodef doesn't need to be warned before he's killed. Normally in Beit Din, if someone's going to be executed, they could only be executed if they were warned about their crime before they did it. But for a rodef, it sounds like he doesn't need to have had a warning. Okay? So the question about rodef is, what's the basis for the halacha of rodef? Are you allowed to kill the rodef as like a punishment, like he's pursuing a victim, so he should be punished by having his life taken? Or maybe not, because maybe if it's about a punishment, maybe we should let the court handle it, right? Not take matters into our own hands. Or is it just permission to save a life because one person is pursuing another? You have a victim, a victim situation, so we have permission to save a life. The important distinction there is about malicious intent, right? If it's a punishment, so then it sounds like the pursuer needs to have like malicious intent, that they're to really be like pursuing this victim. If it's just permission to save the life of the victim, to save the life, then maybe it doesn't matter if the pursuer has malicious intent or not, which would obviously have ramifications for a situation of a baby who doesn't have malicious intent, right? So, the Gemara in source 14, I think, well, let's finish reading it. Okay, so the Gemara says, rodef doesn't need a warning. Lo shna gadol v'lo shna katan. It doesn't matter if it's an adult or a child. Eitvei, Rav Chizda Rav Huna. Rav Chizda brings a challenge on Rav Huna's ruling. Rav Huna said a child could be killed to save a person, to save a victim, and Rav Chizda brings a challenge. Rav Chizda says, Yatsa, from the Gemara, from the Mishnah on Ohalo that we've been seeing about the mother and the baby. Right, Rav Chizda says, Yatsa Rosho, Ein Nogin Bo, if the baby's head has already come out, you can't touch the baby. Because we don't choose one life over another. V'amai rodefu, why not? If a child could be killed for being a rodef, why can't you kill the baby once the baby's come out? Isn't the baby endangering the mother's life? Isn't the baby a rodef? And Rav Huna responds, Shani hata, no, that the case is different than Mishmaya karad fela, that because the pursuit is from heaven. It's kind of like, how to translate that is a subject of debate, but it seems like it's from natural causes, right? Like the fact that like the mother's in a situation of childbirth, natural causes, the baby, it's not really like the baby pursuing her, it's more like the natural causes, like endangering her life. And therefore, even though normally you can kill a rodef, even a child, in that situation, in that Mishnah, you wouldn't be able to. Yeah.
I'm not sure I understand what we do not touch it, for we must not push one side. The baby's head is out.
Right.
So what happens?
You can't kill it.
You can't
You have-
kill it in order to save them,
Right.
at that
Right.
point. It's
So
a
you
baby.
deliver the baby, and the baby either
You
lives or...
deliver the baby. but
Yeah.
You do help the baby
Mhm.
be delivered.
Ein
The
nogan bo
doctor.
means meaning you can't
Harm
it.
it.
Yeah.
Ah, so because it's
You
in the
deliver the
process
baby,
of
and if that results in the mother dying, then the mother dies.
What if we know they're both going to die? In other words,
So you still can't. Meaning it's based on what we saw from the Yerushalmi, it sounds like you still can't actively.
even if you knew both were going to die, if you
Right. Unless we can call one of them a rodef, which is the case of like regular childbirth. It sounds like the Mishnah is saying we can't because of this mishmaya karad fela. It's like caused by natural causes. Okay, so it seems like the rodef, the permission to kill one person to save another's life of rodef shouldn't work for baby A and baby B because this is natural causes, right? No, they were born this way, like this is natural causes. But maybe if we define mishmaya karad fela a little bit differently, maybe the rodef allowance would apply here, right? Maybe we only can't interfere when it's unclear who is the rodef, right? If it's natural causes, then we can't really decide, like, is A pursuing B or is B pursuing A? Like in the case of the mother and the baby, like is the mother pursuing the baby or is the baby pursuing the mother? But when we really know who's the victim and who's the pursuer, then maybe we can use the rodef heter. The problem with that is that why does that, in the Mishnah in Ohalo, right, think back, the Mishnah in about the mother and the baby, we say once the baby comes out, we can't do anything to either of them because we can't choose one life. It sounds like we don't know who's pursuing who. But what's the problem with that? What about when the baby was inside? Then what was the halacha?
Then you were allowed to.
Then you were allowed to. So why are you? Then it's clear that the baby is the pursuer. Why are you allowed to then? So
It changes, the status of the baby changes somehow when it comes out, but that's problematic in and of itself because we know that we don't, what's considered a chai.
right.
And so if we say in utero, in this circumstance, it seems like somehow in utero, is somehow less of a chai than ex utero, but we know that we don't abort in utero in other circumstances,
Right,
so
so-
it's problematic.
So, okay, so that's exactly what we need to explain. Which Rav Moshe explains in source 16. I'm going to skip source 15 for now. Right, so what I just said is implied by the Mishnah Oelo, and it's also implied by the Yerushalmi in source 15. I'm going to skip it for now for the sake of time. And this is what Rav Moshe is trying to explain in source 16. This is a different Shuva of Rav Moshe that was published actually in the Rav Moshe. And he says, right, that which I wrote that it's forbidden to kill him because his pursuit is from heaven, that's not because the law of Rodef doesn't apply and that it's natural and not with malicious intent, right? He says we shouldn't translate Mishmaya Karadfela as about being natural causes. Rather, since the pursuit is from heaven, the two are both considered pursuers since it's impossible for them to both live, and therefore it's forbidden to kill the baby because of the consideration of how can we decide whose blood is redder. He says in the Mishnah and Ohalot, Mishmaya Karadfela means that the natural causes make it so that we can't decide who is really the Rodef and who is not the Rodef. It takes it out of the category of Rodef because now it takes it out of the heter of Rodef because now they're both equally Rodfim. They're both equally pursuing the other. We can't decide whose blood is redder when they're both equally pursuing the other, right? It's like, I just forget a bad example. I was gonna give an example of like a shootout, whatever, like a chase. But in that case, like there's still
There's
one
always a
person,
chaser,
like the policeman is still like trying to harm the guy because
The high news.
he was the criminal.
They
If they
both
both
face
had
each other, but they
100% chance of surviving, if the other one didn't survive, it wasn't, then that's the scenario that Rav Moshe is talking about here.
Right.
It's not like, we almost never have that situation, so
Right.
it's like a little different.
Right, obviously we never know in advance exactly
Right,
what's
but
going
as
to be.
much information as we could have.
Right, but he's saying that the Mishnah in Ohalo, the reason the Mishnah says once the baby comes out, you can't touch either of them is because then they're both equally pursuing the other, and we can't choose whose blood's redder once they're both equally pursuing the other. But and now he has to explain how is it different in the when the baby's still inside. Right, he says, and therefore this only applies when the pursuit is equal on both sides, like the case of the baby whose head emerged, who is a full-fledged life like the mother. But with a fetus who isn't yet a full-fledged life, right? So even though the abortion in halacha is complicated, we still do have sources that tell us it's not exactly the same as when the baby's out, and the mother is a full-fledged life, and he isn't, then only the fetus is a pursuer, and the mother isn't, so the fetus can be considered a pursuer because of the advantage the mother has over him. So that's why it changes, because they're not equally pursuing each other when the baby's in. Once the baby's out, then they are. So how does that apply to our case? Here he says that it seems like they're actually not qualitatively equal, right? Because one twin is weaker than the other and has no chance of survival. So he's saying that we can actually determine who's pursuing who because the pursuit is not equal. And that's what we'll read now in source 17. I'm going to skip the beginning part where he's summarizing the sources that we just saw. Please feel free to look back at that on your own later. But I'm going to go to the underlined part of the bottom on page 6. So he says, Rabbi Tendler reports that Rabbi Feinstein compared the case of the Siamese twins to this classic case of the conflict for survival between a mother in childbirth and the fetus. Baby A had no independent ability to survive. Her entire survival was completely dependent on her sister, who had the circulatory system to back up the functioning of the heart and liver. To Rabbi Feinstein's critical question, can the heart be given to baby A and she would live, Dr. Koop had responded, no, there is no way to save baby A. The issue is only should both die or should baby B be saved. Without the attempted separation, both would surely die, and therefore in halachic terminology, we classify the baby that had no independent survival, baby A, as the pursuer, as if she were pursuing her sister and threatening her life. So the final decision was that I don't know if you want to call it the kula or the chumrah, because again, as we've spoken about many times over our learning, every leniency comes, with a stringency on the backside of it. But Rabbi Moshe did permit the surgery, right? He called up the surgeon, he said, go ahead with it. They did the surgery, and the aftermath of the story is that unfortunately baby B died 2 months later of some other complication that had nothing to do with the surgery, which was very unfortunate. But I think this whole story, this whole episode, and seeing Rav Moshe's reasoning it out, first of all, his original understanding of the Mishmaya Karad Fela and how he applied, of what it means that in the Mishnah Ohalo that you can't, that once the baby's out, you can't harm the mother, you can't harm the baby or the mother because of his reinterpreting of the natural causes thing to mean that they're both equally, the pursuit is equal, I think is an interesting analysis and a creative analysis that allowed him to reach this conclusion. I mean, he didn't reach that conclusion about that Mishnah in discussion of this particular question. He had already kind of reached that conclusion earlier in his analysis of this topic and other tshuvos. But I think that that's a creative way of understanding it that allowed him to reach certain conclusions. And it also just really shows like his greatness and his understanding of, his greatness and his understanding of the responsibility of being a leader, of being a halachic authority, of being a pusik, and taking on that responsibility. And if you look at we'll come back to source 18 in a second, but if you look at source 19, he actually writes himself in a tshuva that sometimes that when a person is of such stature that they're able to rule on such questions, they actually have an obligation to. And sometimes you could imagine someone saying like, I don't want to take this on, I don't want to rule on this, I don't want to paskin, I don't want that responsibility. But someone of his stature understood that he had an obligation to the community to do that. And I think that was something that, his humility to realize that, his humility balanced with his recognition that he has an obligation to the community to rule on these questions, I think is something admirable. And he writes in source 19, right, he's talking about how it's okay for us to make new rulings, which we saw at the beginning in our first class, that we can have original understandings of sources. And he says, but we shouldn't be coarse in our rulings, and we should refrain as much as possible. But in a situation of great need, and all the more so in a situation of ego, and right, talking about freeing a chained woman, helping her get out of a marriage where her husband's refusing to give a get, like this case, right, that's the case that he's writing about in this tshuva where I quoted from. We are certainly obligated to rule, even if it slightly seems like it's permissible. And it's forbidden for us to be among the humble ones and cause the women of Israel to be chained, or to cause anyone to stumble and sin, or to lose money. And he's saying that sometimes weighty questions are weighty, and you have to recognize the responsibility that comes with answering such a question, but someone who's qualified to rule on it is obligated to rule on it. And I think that is something that he really kind of was able to synthesize, that humility with that recognition that we need leaders in our community, and someone who's qualified to lead really needs to do so. I wanted to close with source 18, which is an interview with Rabbi Tendler, this interview has nothing to do with the conjoined twins tshuva, but he was Moshe's son-in-law, and in Kol HaMevaser, which is a publication of Yeshiva University where they write about and talk about different Jewish, halachic, hashkafic, philosophical issues. And one of the issues, they interviewed Rabbi Tendler about Rav Moshe Feinstein. And I thought what he wrote kind of was a really nice sum up of everything that we've been seeing in our learning together. So the question was, as a son-in-law of the great Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, can you reflect on his role in 20th century America?
Mecha Thursday. Pay attention, everybody. Ninth graders in the Beit Knesset, bring a pen or pencil with you. Ninth grade, Beit Knesset, pen or pencil with you. 10th graders, NPR. Let's head on over there. 10th, NPR. 11th and 12th graders, regular room. I'm going to say that one more time. Ninth, Beit Knesset with a pen or pencil. 10th, NPR. 11th and 12th, regular room. See you soon, guys.
And so if they write in the book, he didn't read the newspaper, he was so pure. He says he always read the newspaper, either the Tog in the early years. I'm not even going to try to pronounce these things. Someone could probably help me, or that other one later on, cover to cover every single day. People published that he would walk down the street and avert his eyes when he passed by newspaper stands. There are 1,000 Talmidim of his who will testify. I bought the paper and handed it to him in the lunchroom in the yeshiva. But it does not make a difference for some people. They do not want to hear that. Even when he was not well, and the doctor insisted that he must lie down to sleep for an hour.
Dahlia Mermelstein, please come up to Mr. Detail for a minute.
That his wife would not see it. He sat there reading the whole time rather than sleeping. I used to ask him, why do you read this Chazarai? He would respond to me, something in Yiddish that I'm not going to try to pronounce. This is my window to the world. He understood society, and his Piskei Halacha showed that. He used to say, people would think that because I'm aware of society, I became a Mikil, a lenient decisor. What do they want me to do? Paskin incorrectly? I'm not a Mikil. I paskin the way it has to be. The Halacha takes into account societal factors. This willingness to be exposed to society made his chuvos more meaningful and more acceptable. And I think we saw throughout our learning, one of the features of his chuvos, right, part of his methodology was definitely a creative approach to the sources and looking at earlier sources, with his own eyes, and being able to apply his understanding of it to the questions at hand, and not ignoring, developments of halacha into later sources, but not necessarily only going by the weight of those sources and without his own original understanding. And also like a really unique, I think, or not entirely unique, but a really amazing sensitivity to societal factors and the human condition around him, which I think is highlighted by what Rabbi Thunder said here. And the last thing he says is the success as a posting, I think, also stems from how hard he worked on every tshuva. He first wrote a given tshuva on a piece of stationery, then recorded it in a composition notebook, then copied it into a big ledger, and finally reviewed it and sent it in for publication with notes and additions in the margins. His hard work paid off. During the last months of his life, he said to me, Baruch Hashem, I've never had to retract the tshuva. He did a better job than most in that respect. So I think that was a nice kind of sum up of some of the different themes that we saw in Rav Moshe's writing throughout our learning, and hopefully we've explored some interesting topics while also getting a greater appreciation for Rav Moshe Feinstein as a leader, as a posnik, and his methodology, who really did bear influence on our community, despite the fact that he wasn't necessarily part of our community. He really, I think, had a lot of influence on all of our lives. So thank you again so much for joining me for this learning.